What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to the conversation, the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with my next guest. You know, this is award season. So ever since, let's say right before the Golden Globes, I've been doing a series of just interviewing people that I love, interviewing people who created films and made films that I love, those that I'm actually critical of and excited for and to celebrate. And you guys all know when I announced on Good Morning America the Oscar nominations, how much I felt about this next film. This is one of my top 2 films of the season. And so I couldn't wait to help unpack this story. And that is Poor Things. I think Poor Things was one of the most let's say, well-constructed films of this season. And you all know, ladies and gentlemen, that I love talking with the writers and directors more than the actors. And so I have a very special treat. I have the writer of the film Poor Things, Oscar nominated for adapted screenplay for Poor Things, Mr. Tony Mcnamara. What's happening, sir?
Wow, thank you for that introduction. I'm glad you like our film so much. It's excellent.
Oh my God, I'm obsessed with your film. I went to go see it with me and a good friend of mine, shout out to Adam, and it was a cold afternoon here in New York City, and we went to see the matinee, and we walked home back to the area that we live in. We're neighbors. And we talked the entire way because there was just so much to unpack. And so just congratulations on creating such a fantastic narrative that was so layered and so nuanced. How are you feeling about how well this is being received this award season?
I'm feeling a bit stunned and super excited. I mean, we're sort of thrilled that people like it so much. I don't know whether we certainly didn't expect it to be like this. That's
for sure. When you were writing such a nuanced perspective, like, do you think about like how audience will receive it? What are you thinking? Because it's kind of complicated. If you know, I'm thinking.
Yeah, you're sort of thinking about. I sort of don't. I try to write it just as if I was the audience, and Yorgos obviously is my first audience. But you are, as a screenwriter, you're always going, how's that going to read? How are the audience going to read that?
Mm-hmm.
Are we telling it well enough, clear enough? Has it got enough depth and texture? And is it funny enough? Tonally consistent. So you are always asking your sort of self the questions that you think, I guess, the audience might have a problem with, or but a lot of it is like I kind of write, that Yorgos films kind of we have a similar sensibility. So a lot of it's like, we think this would be fun, and Emma as well, we're all have a very similar like take on the world, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, let's dive right there, because I'm always interested in the adaptive process aspect of it. So I'm actually curious about, because this is based upon a novel. And so I'm always curious about when a writer decides what this film is not. Right. And so, like, how did you create this lens of a POV? And when you're adapting it for film, to say, this is what this is not, because if not, it'll be a 10-hour movie if you went like,
yeah.
How do you do the editing process?
I think it's like I read it, and I'd never adapted a book before. And so I thought this probably shouldn't be the one to start with, because it was just kind of insane. But it was also massive. A lot of the book is about Scottish nationalism. The book is told, Bella's story is sort of told by other people, by the men in the story. You're never with her. You never get her point of view of the story. So I think the first big decision we made was we're doing it all from her perspective, which meant it made it easy to choose, because in a way it removed an enormous amount of the book, because a lot of what's not in the book is her perspective of the experience. What is in the book is the premise and the fact she goes on this journey, and certain elements that we were faithful to. But I think really, for me, when I adapt from history or anything, it's like, just go with the spirit, but it's actually got to be a piece of cinema, not in it. So in a way, I'm always trying to get away from the exact history or the exact book. So it feels like this is nothing but what it is. Like, it's a piece of cinema, Listening
a little bit more into that, and Tony, my audience may not be that familiar with the narrative of adapted screenplay,
Sure.
right? And how audience is just not taking a book and just going line for line, but what makes it adaptive is taking pieces and components out of it and making like a new material, if you will.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're trying to do, is kind of create a movie out of pieces of something that you like. Like we had the premise of I don't want to ruin it, but the premise of why she is the way she is at the start of the movie. And from there, it was sort of like, I think with Yorgos, it's like you're making a Yorgos movie. So as much as you're adapting the book. So it was really like we took an idea, which is sort of present in the book a little bit. I went, oh, let's make this book. Our movie was going to be a satire about control and how human beings, we have this stupidity, like we'll want to control things, even if we love them, even if it's manifestly stupid. And also this great, I was like, oh, he and I were like, this is a great coming of age story. And for me, it was like, okay, so here's a woman without society, without shame. And so you make choices in terms of like, her goal is just to have a free adventure and create herself. And then everything else that's not, and nothing else matters. So in a way, if you read the book like a couple of times and then you sort of never read it again for like 4 years. So the film just becomes a film, and all of and I think, we're relatively, it feels like the spirit of the book. I mean, the book isn't as funny maybe as the film, and it has Yorgos and my sensibility all over it, and that's not the sensibility of the book. But the book had a great premise, and it had certain things that as a writer and as a director, you're like, well, that's what we love. We love the premise. And also because it wasn't told from her point of view, we had to invent huge amounts of it, because
let me read you this, because I love how you said for you it was a satire and power of choice, right? And control. I had a different take, similar but a different reaction. But Tony, I recognize I was so excited in talking with you that I forgot to set what the movie is about for the audience members who have not watched this movie. My interpretation, I'll let you do it, Tony, too, is just an incredible adventure of like this mad scientist who's able to construct this female Bella who we're talking about to go on this adventure, which is becoming a coming of age. I know that was very reductive, Tony, but maybe in your perspective, what is...
No, I think it is like it's a lot of things, which is why it was a sort of difficult to adapt, because it's a comic fantasy, it's a satire, it's very much at its core a story of a young woman in sort of having an adventure in the world and kind of like and so it is a coming of age story, just a very unique coming of age story, because she can't be controlled, she doesn't know what society is, and she just greets each adventure in a completely open, unjudgmental way. She doesn't carry any preconceptions about anything. And then as she evolves, she kind of discovers food, she discovers wine, she discovers sex, she discovers like politics and intellectual life, and she discovers she's kind of a privileged brat. And she discovers, there's all these things that she's discovering throughout the movie that Emma's so incredible. And, and it's also a comedy, a sort of comic satire on that human beings have an innate desire to control each other. And it's, everyone wants to control her ideas, her body, her thoughts. And it's sort of like they can't quite get traction on it, and that seemed a really funny idea. And it seemed an interesting time. We started the movie 5 or 6 years ago, and movies come out, and suddenly I think it's an interesting time to make a movie where it's about people wanting to control someone's ideas and thoughts and body, and there's a way to be, and it's all that kind of thing, which I think is kind of what we were attracted to, and we just thought it was a bizarre, funny story at bottom.
It kind of happened because when you guys were making this film 5-6 years ago, we weren't in this moment of control, right? If you think about, at least in American society, like reproductive rights and womanhood and feminism, which I actually thought this movie, you talk about coming of age, I thought we were watching Bella, audience, the character, develop into a feminist. And I actually got feminism out of this movie. That was like my main takeaway, was feminism and sexual liberation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't think, I think for a while we were like, oh, two guys making a feminist film or whatever, but it is, and it is about someone discovering sex without shame and discovering, it is about a liberated person, liberated from society's ideals and meeting life on its own terms. And so,
Even
and
if
that
you
was
think about the idea of, choice, right? Like
like,
feminism is about power
100%.
of agency, right? And like for a female to own her agency, to express it in any way that she chooses to represent that. And I think that is kind of what you're saying about the power of choice, because even with the sexual, for me, audience, this is more about sex, obviously, but I think the brilliancy of the writing kind of leading up to the section where we get to the sex forward part of the film.
Yeah.
You done such a great job of writing it, and obviously I know it's a team, there's no I in team, but since I'm talking to you, Tony,
Yeah.
you did such a good job in writing it that I wasn't looking at full frontal nudity from a place of stimulation or arousal or a sexual feeling. It was almost as if I didn't even see sex, but almost as this person exploring her agency, which is rare when you see sex scenes. Normally sex scenes evokes some type of like response, the viewer.
Yeah.
But for me, I was very void of that. That's what me and Adam were talking about walking home, was how we were both void of this sexual perspective, but looking at it more from a person defining agency, which is
Yeah.
incredible and compliment to your writing.
Well, thank you. Well, it's funny you say that, because I was like, in my terms of writing a script, I don't write sex scenes. I write scenes where it's a character beat, it's an evolution beat, it's a kind of like her discovering in each beat. It's not about the sex per se or seeing the sex per se. It's just about her, exactly what you say, having agency in each moment, and kind of having a kind of experience that takes her to the next beat in her life and takes her to the next. And each one is an evolution, and each one she's always kind of claiming agency in sort of funny ways, where it's like, she wants to reinvent the brothel, but it's kind of like, well, so it was for me. It's like, it was never like I'm writing a sex scene. It was really like I'm writing the next beat, which is about her understanding that she's had joy from sex, but there's also there's a darker side at sometimes, and there's kind of like, so it was always that. And that's why, hopefully, and the way Yorgos and Emma is so thoughtful about all that and how they do it, that I think that's why it was dishonest not to have those scenes, even though in a way, but they're not prurient. And I think we pride ourselves on like their character beats, they're about her journey and nothing else. So it's actually, what you say is actually great.
I love what I do, Tony, and I'm telling you, that's why I love this film, right? Like, this isn't like I want to do this interview because I want to interview Tony. I only pick things I love, and then I'm celebrating. And so I have a theory about a certain scene in the beginning. But before I go to your theory, I want to test this out, because I was talking to Adam about this, and Adam, so he didn't disagree with me, but I want to test out with you. But before, how did you think about the pacing of her development? Because I thought that was brilliant writing in terms of how, audience, I'm not going to give anything away with this, but there is this infantile moment in the beginning, and then you get to these adult scenarios at the end. I'll put it like that without giving anything away. How did you think about the pacing of that? Because it was almost, you saw like brain development, going and taking us on this journey, right? But how did you think about the pacing? I thought that was great. And I was thinking, as a writer, that takes a lot of like guardrails, so you don't go too far left, too far right. You don't spend too much time in this particular area of quote unquote development. So I think,
that was probably, I think that was the hardest, like in some ways the hardest, not the hardest part, the biggest challenge, but was how to evolve her. And so I sort of had a few things, like I created it was kind of like she would speak a certain way, and her dialogue would evolve all the time, and it would evolve slowly and very specifically to each. And because it's a journey movie and she's in different places, I was like, okay, each place represents a era, represents a moment, and her language will shift through that and be somewhere else at this point. So it's all kind of that. And then and so it was language, it was the agency she is in each section, and how it grows, and her own intellect grows as the movie goes. So it was a mixture of the dialogue I was really spent a lot of time on, and and then the events and the sort of sequences of those events and where they took her to each time and how that evolved. And it was, but we're very meticulous about, I'm very meticulous about dialogue anyway, but we're extremely meticulous about that with Yorgos and with Emma in rehearsal about, that word's too much, that word's too sophisticated, let's take that word out and put that in. So it was like a real, it was a great challenge, because usually in most movies or things you write, someone talks the way they talk for the whole 100 minutes. And in this, it's like, she never talks, it's sort of like it evolves in like 6-minute intervals for like 2 hours,
Yeah. So, question for you then, with that being said, I'm curious about, in the beginning, the research assistant that is in position to assist this mad scientist.
Yeah.
And in this beginning of the film, this research assistant has been tasked with audience to do calculations and data. I wouldn't say calculations necessarily, but like data points of growth.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where the research assistant does this, I don't want to call it a formula, but he does this numeric value of ratios and proportionality to like growth.
Yeah.
My theory is that you put that in there in the beginning to allow this development process to go so fast throughout the movie, because there was this quantitative research analysis that was done that makes then what we're watching her grow seem more realistic based upon this quantitative data analysis.
Yes, I suspect that's why I did put it.
Maybe I thought you keep
I
into
think it's true. No, it's true. Yeah, it is true. The audience had to understand that there's a lot to take in at the beginning of the movie in terms of the world and understanding all the characters, and one thing you do have to understand is that there's going to be this sort of acceleration. And
I knew what it was. I remember now, Tony. It was the words she was learning, I think, like per day or per minute or
It's like, I think it's like, at a rate of 24 words a day or something.
Yes. Yeah. And I was like, I think they put that in there so that we could see the growth quicker and make it more believable.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was like you have to send, it's those things in screenplays where you have to just center up the audience. You can't leave them blind going, I don't understand what they think is. And because they're scientists, it made perfect sense. That was his job, to report back what he was doing. So it's sort of like, okay, so it helps the audience kind of know the acceleration is going to happen in this kind of crazy way.
You just made my day, Tony, just so you know. And you're speaking to the research. I mean, I used to do nuclear chemical research. And so you're speaking to the research in me. Like, I knew it. I knew it was about the sample size in the pool and quantitative analysis. Sorry, I'm a big geek, so I apologize, Tony, with you on that one. And I know I can't keep you all day. I know you have a heart out. But in a conclusion, I'm just wondering about, in that same vein, is that why either you wrote the character or you added the character of the second patient of the mad scientist? We get introduced to another girl at some point. And it doesn't seem like her development is as quick as Bella's. And so I'm just curious, like, one, was that person's character in the book? Is that something you added? And then, what role did she serve?
Yeah, it wasn't in the book. I added it because for two reasons. One, I wanted to tell the audience, she was away for a long time, and I was like, what are we cutting back to? Like, because she's gonna come back and if I haven't been there, and or I've got nothing to do when I come back to them, I was like, we'd still have to track these guys. And I was like, Baxter, the character Baxter, he'd kind of created one, and he was grief-stricken, but he was also a sort of male idiot and a scientist. So he kind of, all his sort of worst version of himself went, I'll just make another one, as if you can replace her. And then her not developing well and him not having connection to her, well, it's like him going, I'm an idiot. I love this other person who is a singular person, whereas Max and the other people in the house actually quite like the new one. But so it was a way for us, in a structural way, to be able to jump time when we went back and forth. When we went back to Bella on her journey, I'd be able to jump days or weeks And it was a way to keep on the story of Godwin and his growth as a person, you know, so that when she came back, you felt like he understood something about himself that he didn't know at the start of the movie, and that would feed the final scenes between them.
Cody, I know this interview is about you, but ultimately this is my ego that you are celebrating right now, that I was fucking right. Right? I just like, I fucking knew it. Like, I didn't even read the book, right? But I was like, I feel like this character got added, right? So I was just like, bro, thank you for just existing. Like, you have like just made my whole life, right? I just don't know why every other writer in Hollywood just doesn't stop by the Mike Muse Show. They're playing themselves, right, Tony? They're playing
Totally. Wow. Well,
Tony,
I mean, wow. I love that you've read it all. Damn.
Yeah. No, Tony, I'm just like I said before, man. I can keep you. I can talk to you all day. Shout out to my niece, who's also a big fan of Cruella. But she and I watched it a while ago, and that's one of our favorite movies to watch together. It actually, real talk, that actually started this annual summer tradition in the Hamptons where we watch movies together, usually the Sunday morning before we have to return back to New York City for the week. But we have a Sunday morning movie that we watch together with the nieces, and so Cruella.
Cool. Yeah, it's a great movie. My kids just saw it for the first time.
Yeah. Sorry, audience. Sorry. Tony wrote also to Cruella. So context. I get so excited, Tony, I forget there's a whole audience out there watching us. Right. It's like it's you. So congratulations on your Oscar nomination. I'm so impressed by the brilliance of your writing. But I wish you nothing but the best on Oscar night. And I will be there at the Oscars and the Gov Ball. So
right. Cool. Right. I'll see ya.
So don't get nervous when this random black guy just runs up to you like, Tony, it's me, Tony, it's your boy Mike. You remember me, Tony?
Be like, I was right about everything.
Yeah. It's the journalist with the biggest ego you've ever met about how right he was about everything. Tony, I can't wait for your next project, man. Do you have it already? Team, I'm going to let him go. But do you already have? I know your team is like, hang up. Do you have your next project ready?
Yeah, I've got a movie, comedy later in the year, and I've got a new one with Yorgos in a little while, and so I got a few coming up.
Oh my God, Tony, please come back to the Mike Muse Show, man. I can't wait to unpack whatever it is, because the way you think is brilliant, my guy. It's so brilliant.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Best of luck. Have a good day, Tony.
You too. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks, team.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Okay. Bye-bye.